I never imagined a $2 plastic cup would change everything. Mother's Day. The table set with fine china. My son Jason beaming as he presented his mother-in-law with a blue velvet box. Inside, a 3-stone diamond ring worth $30,000 and cruise tickets. "Because you've always been like a mother to me," he said. Everyone applauded. Then he turned to me, his actual mother who had sacrificed everything, and handed me a dollar store cup with glitter and a note. "You've always been strong, Mom. You never needed much." That night, I opened a safe I hadn't touched in 22 years and found a document Jason never knew existed. By morning, his phone was ringing nonstop. 45 desperate calls. "Please, Mom, don't sell the company. Some lessons come too late, and some cups cost far more than anyone could imagine." If you want to discover what happened next in this emotional story of betrayal, justice, and a mother's difficult choice, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below where you're watching from. You won't believe how this ends. I never liked being the center of attention, but that Sunday, I realized I wasn't even an option worth noticing. The house was packed like it was Christmas. Laughter echoed from the backyard. The grill crackled, and my daughter-in-law Lydia's voice rang out as if she were hosting at the White House itself. My son Jason came and went like a hurried waiter, a nervous smile plastered on his lips. Every eye in the room was on her mother, a woman I'd known for 15 years who had never once looked at me without looking down her nose. But that was fine. I didn't come for her. I came for him, for my son. I waited in silence as she opened the gift Jason presented in front of everyone. A small blue velvet box. Inside, a 3-stone diamond ring that caught the light in a way that made everyone gasp. "Because you've always been like a mother to me," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. She cried, everyone applauded, and then he came to me, looking somewhat embarrassed, and handed me a plastic bag. Inside was a hot pink glitter cup, the kind you'd find at a dollar store. With it, a note. "You've always been strong, Mom. You never needed much." And then he turned his back. I smiled, because that's what they expected. But in that moment, I decided I would never again let anyone mistake my humility for weakness. That night, after everyone had gone, I opened the safe I hadn't touched in 22 years. Inside, along with a will, there was a document Jason didn't even imagine existed, one that made my decision, from that moment on, irreversible. The next morning, as the sun rose over my small garden, I sat staring at that plastic cup. $2. That's what I was worth to him. $2 against the $30,000 sparkling on his mother-in-law's finger. $2 against the cruise tickets they'd proudly shown off during dessert. "Mom," he'd said to her, not to me, "you deserve to see the world." I ran my fingers over the document. Founding shares of Meridian Technologies. My name, my signature. The company that now made millions. The company he bragged about at every family gathering. The company that existed because I had sacrificed everything. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd kept for emergencies. "Arnold? It's Helen. Yes, it's been a while. Listen, I need to speak with you about those shares we discussed. Yes, it's time." I hung up and looked at that ridiculous cup one more time. Funny how sometimes the smallest things can bring down an empire. I placed it carefully on my kitchen counter where it would stay. A reminder of the day I stopped being invisible. The safe remained open beside me. Inside was also the photo of Jason at 8 years old, gap-toothed and beaming, holding the science fair trophy we'd stayed up all night to finish. The boy who once said, "When I grow up, I'm buying you a castle, Mommy." Castle. Cup. Life has a way of showing you who people really are. I took a deep breath and closed the safe. By this time tomorrow, everything would change, and I wondered, would he call me 45 times then? Would he remember my birthday next month? Would he finally see me? It didn't matter anymore. Some lessons come too late, and some cups cost far more than anyone could imagine. Jason never knew about the night he slept on the basement floor, shivering with fever while I sold sandwiches by the roadside to buy his antibiotics. He doesn't remember the time I went without food for 2 weeks to pay for his extra classes. That's okay. Mothers do these things without expecting anything in return. But what he also never knew was that when he was 26 years old and bankrupt, drowning in debt after a failed business venture with a friend who turned out to be a con artist, it was my name that saved his. I used the deed to my house, my only security, to guarantee a loan. He started the company thinking it was all his, but the bank required me as a joint owner. I never corrected this misunderstanding. Out of love, out of pride in seeing him succeed, on that Mother's Day night, I took the documents from the safe, the original company contract with my name as the majority partner. I never touched it, never needed to, until now. He gave me a plastic cup, and he thought I wouldn't see what was written between the lines. The morning after Mother's Day, I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped Jason with his homework for 12 years. Sunlight filtered through the faded curtains I'd been meaning to replace for a decade. Never needed much, his note had said. True, I suppose. I never bought myself new clothes when the old ones could be mended. Never replaced the ancient TV that flickered in the corner. Never fixed the crack in the bathroom sink. But it wasn't because I didn't need things. It was because every extra penny went to him, to his education, his clothes, his future. I sipped coffee from that ridiculous pink cup, feeling its cheap plastic bend slightly under the pressure of my fingers. There was a crack forming already, just like the cracks forming in the facade I'd maintained for so long. The phone rang, startling me. Jason's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again, and again. By the fourth call, my hands were shaking. I'd spent the night reading through every document, every contract, every piece of paper related to Meridian Technologies. What I found confirmed what I already knew. I owned 51% of the company, a company now worth millions, a company Jason paraded around as his sole achievement. On the legal pad beside me, I'd made notes. 3 phone calls I needed to make, 2 meetings to arrange, 1 decision that would change everything. The 6th call from Jason went unanswered. I opened my laptop, the one he'd bought me 3 Christmases ago when my old one finally died. So we can video chat more often, he'd said. We never did. My email inbox had 3 messages from him already. Subject lines increasingly urgent. Mom, call me back. Urgent, please respond. We need to talk now. I deleted them all without opening. Instead, I typed an email to Arnold Baxter, my late husband's attorney, a man who'd kept my secrets for 30 years, a man who owed me a favor after I nursed his wife through chemotherapy when no one else would help. Meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. Bringing all documentation. Please prepare transfer paperwork. Send. The clock on the wall, a wedding gift from 1978, ticked loudly in the silence. I thought about the cruise tickets Jason had given his mother-in-law. 7 days in the Caribbean, to make memories that will last a lifetime, he'd said, beaming at her while I sat in the corner, clutching my plastic cup. I remembered when Jason was 10, how he'd made me a cruise ship out of cardboard boxes in the backyard. One day, Mom, I'll take you on a real one, he'd promised, his eyes bright with childhood certainty. Promises, so easily made, so easily broken. By 11 o'clock, the calls were coming every few minutes. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the table. The documents were neatly organized in my husband's old briefcase. Cracked leather, worn at the edges, but still sturdy. Like me, I changed into my good dress, navy blue, modest, purchased on sale 5 years ago for a cousin's funeral. Applied a touch of lipstick, brushed my silver hair until it shone. If today was the day I reclaimed my life, I would look the part. As I was about to leave, I noticed Jason's high school graduation photo on the mantel. His smile, so much like his father's. His eyes so full of promise. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then my gaze fell on that pink plastic cup, already cracking under the weight of my disappointment. No, some lessons can only be taught through consequences. By the time I returned from my meeting with Arnold, my phone showed 45 missed calls from Jason. 45 desperate attempts to reach me, not because he missed me, not because he loved me, but because somehow He'd discovered what I always knew. You can ignore your mother. You can take her for granted. You can reduce her worth to a $2 cup. But sometimes, just sometimes, that mother holds the key to everything you thought was yours. On Monday morning, the first call came early. I didn't answer, nor the second, nor the 10th. By 11:44 a.m., he had called 45 times. Something had frightened him. The night before, after everyone had left, Lydia let a phrase slip within my earshot, perhaps not realizing I could hear. Now that we've got control of the company, you can finally take her out of the picture. It wasn't the first time I'd overheard strange things. Whispered phone calls, dinners where my chair was missing, but I had always remained silent. Until now. Jason knew something had changed. Perhaps he had finally noticed the open safe. Perhaps someone had mentioned my name in some contractual clause. I don't know. I only know that he began searching for me like never before. And it wasn't out of longing. It was fear. I sat in my small living room as the spring morning light filtered through the lace curtains I'd sewn by hand decades ago. The antique clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds with the same steady rhythm it had maintained for 40 years. Tick, tock, each sound marking another moment of Jason's growing panic. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the polished wood of the coffee table. I glanced at the screen. Call number 46. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, remembering the night I'd heard those whispers. It had been 3 months ago, a dinner at Jason and Lydia's sprawling colonial house in the suburbs. The kind of house I'd only ever dreamed of. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a swimming pool visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. All the trappings of success. Success built on my signature, my sacrifice, my silent support. I'd excused myself to use the bathroom, but took a wrong turn down the hallway. That's when I heard them. Jason and Lydia in his home office, voices low but clear through the partially open door. "Your mother still owns 51%, Lydia had said, her voice tight with irritation. "We need to get those shares transferred before we can move forward with the merger." "She doesn't even know," Jason had replied. "She's never looked at the paperwork, never asked questions. She trusts me completely." "That trust is costing us millions," Lydia had snapped. "The Donovan deal is contingent on clear ownership. You need to handle this, Jason, before Mother's Day. Make her feel special, then get her to sign." I'd backed away silently, heart pounding, pretending I'd heard nothing when I rejoined them at the dinner table. Pretending I didn't notice how they exchanged glances whenever I spoke. Pretending I was still the naive, trusting mother they thought I was. Now, as call number 47 lit up my phone screen, I thought about the document Arnold and I had signed yesterday afternoon, the irrevocable transfer of my shares, not to Jason as he had planned, but to a blind trust controlled by me and me alone, a trust that could sell those shares to the highest bidder without Jason's knowledge or consent. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Jason's car in my driveway, the sleek black BMW he'd bought himself for his 40th birthday. A small reward for all my hard work, he'd told me, even as I continued to ride the city bus to my part-time job at the library. I didn't open the door. Instead, I watched through the side window as he pounded on the wood, calling my name with increasing desperation. His usually perfectly combed hair was disheveled. His designer shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a man unraveling. "Mom, please. I know you're in there. We need to talk." I stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as he pressed his forehead against my door in defeat. After what seemed like an eternity, he returned to his car, slamming the door with such force that the sound echoed down my quiet street. Only then did I allow myself to sink into my worn armchair, the same chair where I'd nursed him through chickenpox, where I'd read him bedtime stories, where I'd cried alone the night his father died. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the teacup beside me. Not the plastic monstrosity he'd given me, but my mother's china, delicate and beautiful, and passed down through generations. The phone rang again. This time, a different number. Lydia. "Helen, it's Lydia. Jason is beside himself with worry. He says you're not answering your phone or your door." Is everything all right? Her voice was honey sweet, concerned. The perfect daughter-in-law checking on her elderly mother-in-law. But I knew better now. I knew the venom beneath the sweetness. I'm fine, Lydia, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Just taking some time for myself. Oh, well, that's good, she said, relief evident in her tone. Jason mentioned something about company paperwork he needs you to sign. Nothing important, just some annual formalities. He could swing by later if you're feeling up to it. I almost laughed at the transparency of it all. How had I been so blind for so long? No need, I replied calmly. I've already taken care of all the paperwork that needed my attention. A beat of silence. Then, what paperwork exactly? Just some shares that needed transferring, I said, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. Nothing important, as you said, just formalities. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Helen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jason should really be the one handling company matters. Why don't I have him call you to explain? No need, I interrupted. Everything's been handled, legal and binding. Please tell Jason not to worry, I'm just fine. I hung up before she could respond, turning off my phone completely. Through my window, I watched as the spring breeze gently ruffled the leaves of the old maple tree in my yard, the tree Jason and his father had planted the day we moved into this house, a lifetime ago. Tomorrow I would face whatever storm came, but today I would sit in the quiet aftermath of my decision and remember why I made it. Because sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who see you the least. The next day, I went to the bank where the business records were kept. Margaret, the manager, had known me for over 30 years, since before Jason was born, when Frank and I opened our first joint account as newlyweds. She had watched me deposit my teacher's salary every month, had seen me withdraw nearly all our savings when Frank got sick, had helped me set up the college fund for Jason that I contributed to religiously, even when it meant going without. When I walked in that Tuesday morning, wearing my best navy dress and my mother's pearl earrings, Margaret looked up from her desk with a warm smile that quickly shifted to surprise. Helen, what a lovely surprise. It's been, 2 years? 3, I corrected gently. Not since I closed Frank's old account. She nodded, the memory passing between us like a shadow. What can I help you with today? I placed my ID and the document from the safe on her desk. I need to verify some information about Meridian Technologies. I understand my name is on the records. Margaret's fingers paused over her keyboard. She glanced at the document, then back at me, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Let me check that for you. The rhythmic click of her typing filled the quiet office. Outside the window, spring had painted Boston in shades of green, the cherry blossoms along Commonwealth Avenue creating a pink canopy over the sidewalks. I remembered pushing Jason in his stroller beneath those same trees, pointing out the flowers, his tiny hands reaching up toward the petals. Helen, Margaret's voice broke through my reverie. She had removed her glasses and her expression was one of confusion. Your name doesn't just appear on the records. According to our files, you're listed as the majority shareholder of the holding company. Has been for, goodness, almost 15 years now. It was never altered. Despite knowing this, despite having seen the documentation myself, hearing it confirmed by a third party sent a wave of something like vertigo through me. All these years of Jason talking about his company, his success, his business acumen, while my name sat silently on the documents that made it all possible. Was this not what you expected to find? Margaret asked carefully, studying my face. I straightened my shoulders, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my dress. No, it's exactly what I expected. I just needed confirmation before my meeting tomorrow. As I left the bank, clutching the official verification Margaret had printed for me, I felt oddly weightless. The truth has a way of unburdening you, even when it's painful. On the drive home, I took a detour through my old neighborhood, a modest collection of small Cape Cod houses where we had lived until Jason was in high school. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot of Gino's Market, the corner store where I'd bought groceries for 20 years. counting pennies and collecting coupons to make ends meet. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, the familiar smell of fresh bread and coffee enveloping me like an old friend. Gino was long gone, retired to Florida according to the neighborhood gossip, but his son Tony stood behind the counter, his father's build and smile evident in his features. "Mrs. Parker!" he exclaimed, recognition lighting his face. "It's been ages!" "Hello, Tony," I said, touched that he remembered me. "How's business?" As we chatted about the neighborhood changes, the door chimed again. A woman in her 60s entered, pushing a shopping cart with a wobbly wheel, the same carts that had been there since I was a young mother. I recognized her immediately. Marian Donahue, mother of Craig Donahue, Jason's former business partner, the one who had left him with those crushing debts years ago, the debts I had saved him from by signing away my financial security. "Helen Parker, is that you?" Marian's voice carried across the small store. She abandoned her cart to embrace me, smelling of the same lavender powder she'd worn for decades. "What on earth brings you back to the old neighborhood?" "Just visiting," I said. "How have you been, Marian?" Her face clouded. "Oh, you know, getting by. Craig's divorce has been hard on all of us. Such a mess with those company shares and all." My pulse quickened. "Divorce? I hadn't heard." Marian's eyes widened with the pleasure of sharing fresh gossip. "Oh my, yes, quite the scandal." His wife found out he'd been hiding company assets during their separation. Some kind of stock fraud involving shell companies. "The judge is making an example of him." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between us, I always wondered if your Jason knew about any of it. They were so close back then." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Shell companies, hidden assets. The same patterns Lydia had mentioned in those whispered conversations. "But he was just his mama's boy, wasn't he?" Marian continued, oblivious to my shock. "Always did worship the ground you walked on." She laughed, the sound brittle in the quiet store. If only she knew. "I should get going," I said, suddenly needing fresh air. "It was good seeing you, Marian." As I drove home, Marian's words echoed in my mind. Had Jason been involved in Craig's schemes? Was that why he needed my signature on those loan documents? Not just to save his business, but to cover up something worse. And now, with this merger Lydia had mentioned, were they trying to erase the paper trail that led back to those early days? My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled over to check it. Another call from Jason, then another. The pattern had continued all day, every 2 hours like clockwork. A desperate man trying to reach the one person who could destroy everything he'd built, or rather, everything I had built and he had claimed. Back at home, I made myself a cup of tea in a proper china cup, not that plastic monstrosity, and sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad. I began to make notes of everything I'd learned, everything I suspected, the shell companies, the merger, the whispered plans to take me out of the picture. By the time darkness fell, I had filled 3 pages, and I had made my decision. This wasn't just about a plastic cup anymore. This wasn't just about being forgotten or devalued. This was about justice, about truth, about making sure that the company built on my sacrifice didn't become a vehicle for deception. Tomorrow, I would meet with Arnold again, and this time, I would bring my notes. Because a mother may forgive being taken for granted, but she should never forgive being used as an unwitting accomplice to fraud. I locked myself away for 2 days. I didn't want to look at photographs or hear my own voice. What hurts more, contempt, or the silence of someone who claims to love you but doesn't act like it. I remembered the day when Jason, at 17, swore that he would take care of me if I ever grew old. "You'll never feel alone, Mom." Those words echoed as I held that ridiculous cup in my hands, the gift from the woman who called me unbearably simple the first time we met. My little house felt smaller than usual during those 2 days of solitude. The walls seemed to press in, decorated with fading photographs charting Jason's growth. From a gap-toothed first grader clutching a soccer ball to a solemn graduate in cap and gown. In each picture, my smile remained the same, proud, hopeful, believing. What a fool I had been. I wandered from room to room like a ghost in my own home, touching familiar objects as if to remind myself they were real. The quilt my grandmother had made, the bookshelf Frank had built by hand, the collection of sea glass Jason and I had gathered during our summers at Cape Cod, back when he still wanted to spend time with his mother. The plastic cup sat on my kitchen counter, its garish pink glitter catching the light whenever I passed. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It had become a symbol of everything wrong between us. Every missed call on my birthday, every Christmas where my gift was clearly an afterthought, every dinner where Lydia's mother was given the seat of honor while I was tucked away at the far end of the table. On the second night, I found myself in the attic, pulling out boxes I hadn't opened in years. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I sifted through the artifacts of our shared past. Jason's baby blanket, his first pair of shoes, the Father's Day card he'd made for Frank the year before the cancer took him. At the bottom of one box, wrapped in tissue paper, I found the wooden music box Jason had given me for Mother's Day when he was 12. He'd saved his allowance for months to buy it. Inside, a small ballerina still twirled to "You Are My Sunshine" when I wound the key. I remembered how his eyes had lit up when I opened it, how he'd anxiously watched my face for a reaction. "Do you like it, Mom?" he'd asked, his voice cracking with the first signs of adolescence. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I'd told him, and I'd meant it. Where had that boy gone? When had the son who saved his allowance for months to buy his mother a gift turned into the man who tossed her a plastic cup while lavishing diamonds on his mother-in-law? I closed the music box, silencing the tinkling melody mid-note. Back downstairs, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad. I'd been thinking too much about the past. It was time to think about the future. What did I want? Not revenge. I wasn't raised that way, but respect? Yes. Acknowledgement? Absolutely. Justice? Perhaps. Through tears and memories, I made my decision. I wouldn't sell the company out of vengeance, but I would sell it out of respect. And the new buyer wouldn't be a stranger. It would be someone Jason had rejected in the past, someone who would now have the power he had wasted. I thought back to the company's early days, the novice energy of a startup, the long hours, the rotating cast of eager young people willing to work for stock options and the promise of future wealth. Most had fallen away as the company grew, discarded by Jason like outgrown clothes. There was one face that kept returning to my mind, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet determination. Teresa something. I couldn't recall her last name, but I remembered how Jason had dismissed her concerns about some financial practice or other. "She doesn't understand how business works in the real world," he'd told me over dinner one night. Too academic, too by the book. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I'd asked about her once, and Jason had waved his hand dismissively. She wasn't a good fit for our culture. I wondered where she was now, whether she'd found success elsewhere, whether she remembered being dismissed by the arrogant young CEO who thought rules didn't apply to him. My phone buzzed again. Jason's 67th call in 2 days. I silenced it without looking at the screen. Instead, I opened my laptop and navigated to LinkedIn. It took some searching. I wasn't as adept with these platforms as younger people, but eventually I found her. Teresa Chen, now the CEO of a smaller tech company focused on financial security systems. Her profile picture showed a confident woman in her late 30s, with the same intelligent eyes I remembered, now framed by stylish glasses. I sent her a message, my fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard. "You may not remember me, but I'm Jason Parker's mother. I'd like to talk to you about Meridian Technologies. Would you be available for coffee this week?" Within an hour, she had responded, "Mrs. Parker, of course I remember you. You were always kind to the staff when you visited. I would be happy to meet. Does tomorrow at 2 p.m. work? There's a quiet cafe near my office." I wrote back a simple confirmation, then closed my laptop. For the first time in days, I felt something like peace settling over me. Not happiness. That was too much to hope for. But purpose, direction, the certainty that comes from knowing you're finally standing up for yourself. I went to bed that night still wearing Frank's old cardigan, wrapped around me like armor against the chill that seemed to have settled permanently in my bones. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself wondering what he would think of all this. Frank had always believed in fairness above all else. "Do what's right, Helen," he'd say whenever I faced a difficult decision. "The rest will sort itself out." I hoped he was right, because tomorrow would change everything. For Jason, for me, and for the legacy we both thought we understood. In the morning, I would meet Teresa Chen, and I would offer her the chance to own what Jason had built on my sacrifice. Not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but because sometimes justice comes in unexpected packages. Sometimes it comes in the form of a mother who finally realizes that her worth can't be measured by a plastic cup. Teresa. I remember her as the girl with the blotchy skin and worn-out books, an intern at the company when everything began. Jason said she didn't have executive presence. He fired her after a small mistake. She left in tears. What he didn't know is that years later, she would become CEO of a rival startup that was now looking to expand. I reached out, set up a coffee meeting. When I told her my story, she cried and promised to take care of the company as if it were her own, as long as I allowed her to keep the family name. I agreed, but with one condition, that she never reveal who the seller was. That afternoon, Jason discovered he had lost everything without understanding how, and he still had no idea that the person behind the sale was the woman he had ignored twice in his life. Maple Leaf Cafe sat on a quiet corner in Cambridge, its large windows letting in the spring sunshine. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the back where we could speak privately. The place smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon, comforting and warm. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey tea and waited, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. At precisely 2 p.m., the bell above the door jingled and Teresa Chen walked in. She was taller than I remembered, dressed in a simple but clearly expensive charcoal suit, her dark hair cut in a sleek bob that framed her face. The nervous intern was gone, replaced by a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the cafe, landing on me. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by a genuine smile. As she approached, I noticed the faint scarring on her cheeks, remnants of the acne that had once marked her skin, now barely visible beneath expertly applied makeup. "Mrs. Parker," she said, extending her hand. "It's been a long time." "Please, call me Helen," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." She settled into the seat, ordering a black coffee when the waitress approached. "Your message intrigued me. It's not every day I hear from the mother of—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "From a former employer." The waitress brought her coffee and refilled my teapot before leaving us alone again. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "Teresa, I'll be direct. I understand you're leading Sentinel security systems now." She nodded, a hint of pride crossing her features. "For 3 years now, we've grown considerably. And you're looking to expand into more comprehensive financial security solutions?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You've done your homework, Mrs. Parker." "Helen, yes, that's our current direction. But I'm curious how this relates to Meridian Technologies." I reached into my handbag and withdrew the folder containing the bank verification and the trust documents. Sliding them across the table, I watched her expression as she opened it and began to read. Her eyes widened, flicking between the papers and my face. "This shows you're the majority shareholder of Meridian. I don't understand. Jason always presented himself as the sole owner." "Jason has presented many things that aren't entirely true," I said quietly, the weight of those words settling between us like stones, "including, I suspect, the reason for your departure from the company." Teresa's face hardened momentarily before she regained her composure. "That was a long time ago, but not forgotten," I observed. She took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim of her cup. "No," she admitted, "not forgotten." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I believe my son is involved in some questionable financial practices, possibly carried over from his early partnership with Craig Donahue." At the mention of Craig's name, Teresa set down her cup with a sharp click against the saucer. Craig Donahue is currently facing federal charges for securities fraud. I know, I said, and I have reason to believe similar practices may have been integrated into Meridian's operations. Practices that you once questioned, perhaps? She was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. I was let go 2 weeks after I raised concerns about how certain investments were being structured, she finally said. I was told I wasn't a culture fit, that I was too rigid, too focused on regulations rather than innovation. And now you run a company that specializes in financial security compliance, I said with a small smile. Life has a way of coming full circle, she agreed, returning the smile briefly before her expression grew serious again. Helen, why are you showing me this? What do you want? I took a deep breath. I want to sell my shares of Meridian Technologies, my controlling interest, and I want to sell them to you. The cafe seemed to go silent around us as Teresa processed my words. Outside, pedestrians passed by the window, unaware of the life-altering conversation happening just feet away. Why me? She finally asked. Because you understand the value of integrity in business. Because you would know exactly where to look for any irregularities. And because, I added, allowing myself a moment of complete honesty, I think there would be a certain poetry in you taking control of the company that once dismissed you. Teresa leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Sentinel doesn't have the liquid capital for an acquisition of Meridian's size. We're successful, but not at that scale. I'm not asking for market value, I replied. I'm asking for enough to secure my retirement and make a donation to Boston Children's Hospital in Frank's name. The rest would be equity in the merged company. She was silent again, calculating. And what about Jason? He's still the CEO, the public face of Meridian. That would be your decision as the new majority owner, I said carefully. I'm selling shares, not dictating management decisions. Teresa's lips curved into a slight smile. But you must have thoughts on the matter. I looked down at my tea, watching the steam rise and dissipate. I think my son needs to learn that actions have consequences, that people are not disposable, that integrity matters. She nodded slowly. I would want to keep the Meridian name. The brand has value, despite everything. I have no objection to that, I said. But I do have one condition, which is that my role in this transaction remains confidential, permanently. As far as the world knows, an anonymous trust sold the shares to Sentinel. My name never appears. Teresa studied me for a long moment. You don't want Jason to know it was you. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, let him wonder. Let him learn that the world he built on shortcuts and disregard for others can collapse just as quickly. She extended her hand across the table. I believe we can come to an agreement, Helen. I'll have my team draw up the paperwork. As we shook hands, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the burden of silent complicity I'd carried for 15 years. Tomorrow, everything would change for Jason, for Meridian, for me. Back at home that evening, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone had been silent for hours. Jason had finally stopped calling. Perhaps he'd given up. Perhaps he was plotting his next move. It didn't matter anymore. I thought about the little boy who had once sat beside me on this same swing, his legs too short to reach the porch floor, telling me about all the wonderful things he would do when he grew up, how he would take care of me, how he would make me proud. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared, replaced by a man who measured worth in dollars and designer labels, who gave his mother-in-law diamonds and his mother plastic, who built his success on the foundation I had provided and then erased me from the story. Tomorrow, that story would be rewritten, not by me, but by Teresa Chen, the woman he had once dismissed as unimportant, the woman who would now control his future. Sometimes, justice arrives in unexpected ways, and sometimes a mother's greatest act of love is allowing her child to face the consequences of his own choices. He appeared at my door late that afternoon, red eyes, wrinkled clothes. He had aged in 2 days. Mom, listen to me, please. I served tea in the same plastic cup he'd given me, and I said nothing. He begged, said he regretted it, that his mother-in-law didn't know about the gift, that it was a misunderstanding, that he loved me. I just listened until he said, "You destroyed my legacy." That's when I looked him in the eyes for the first time and replied, "I only returned the silence you gave me for years." He cried, but there was no hug, just the sound of the door closing behind me. The doorbell rang at 4:37 p.m., just as the afternoon light had begun to soften into early evening. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. A mother always knows her child's presence, even when that child has become a stranger. Jason stood on my porch, shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. His tailored suit, the kind he'd started wearing when Meridian first became profitable, was rumpled as if he'd slept in it. His hair, usually meticulously styled with expensive products, stuck up at odd angles. The dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't slept. For a moment I considered not answering. Let him feel what I had felt all these years. The sting of being ignored, overlooked, forgotten. But some habits die hard. I opened the door. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on that single syllable. "Mom, please, I need to talk to you." I stepped back, allowing him into the house where he had grown up but rarely visited anymore. The living room looked exactly as it had when he was a teenager. The same faded floral couch, the same oak coffee table, the same photographs lining the mantel. Only I had changed, growing older while the world around me remained frozen in time. "Sit down, Jason," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I went to the kitchen and returned with 2 cups, one my favorite ceramic mug for myself, and for him, the pink plastic monstrosity he'd given me. I had filled both with the chamomile tea he used to drink when he was sick as a child. I placed his cup on the coffee table in front of him and sat in Frank's old armchair across from him. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Frank's parents, still keeping perfect time after all these years. "Why, Mom?" he finally asked, looking up at me with reddened eyes. "Why would you do this to me?" I took a sip of my tea, letting the warm liquid settle my nerves before I spoke. "Do what exactly, Jason?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped, a flash of the entitled man he'd become, breaking through his carefully constructed facade of contrition. "You know exactly what you did. You sold your shares. You sold the company out from under me without even talking to me first." "When was the last time you talked to me first before making a decision that affected my life?" I asked quietly. He blinked, confusion crossing his features. "What are you talking about? I don't make decisions that affect your life." I almost laughed at the sheer obliviousness of his statement. "Jason, every choice you've made in the last 15 years has shaped my life. Every dinner you didn't invite me to. Every holiday you spent with Lydia's family instead of me. Every time you forgot my birthday, but remembered to send flowers to her mother." He had the grace to look away, his fingers fidgeting with the handle of the plastic cup. "That's different. Those are personal things. And what about when you made me feel like an afterthought at every family gathering? What about when you gave her mother a diamond ring and a cruise for Mother's Day and gave me this?" I gestured to the cup in his hands. He glanced down, as if seeing the cup for the first time. "It was just a gift, Mom. I didn't think—" "That's right," I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. "You didn't think. You haven't thought about me in years, Jason. Not as a person with feelings. Not as the woman who raised you alone after your father died. Not as the mother who sacrificed everything so you could succeed." He leaned forward, desperation etched into every line of his face. "I'm sorry about the cup, okay? It was thoughtless. I'll make it up to you. I'll buy you whatever you want. But please, Mom, call off this sale. The merger announcement goes public tomorrow morning. If this goes through, I'll lose control of the company. Everything I've built, everything we built," I corrected gently. "With my signature on the loan that started it all. With my house as collateral. With my name on the incorporation documents as majority shareholder." His face paled. "How did you—" "No," I finished for him. I've always known, Jason. I just never said anything because I wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to feel proud of what you'd accomplished. Even if it meant staying in the background. Even if it meant being forgotten. He set the cup down with such force that tea sloshed over the sides, staining my coffee table. I didn't flinch. After all, what was one more stain compared to the marks left on my heart? So this is revenge? He asked, his voice rising. Because I gave you a cheap gift? You're destroying everything I've worked for over a plastic cup. I shook my head slowly. No, Jason, this isn't about the cup. The cup was just the final insult after years of being treated like I didn't matter. This is about respect, about remembering where you came from, about acknowledging the people who helped you get where you are. I can change, he said quickly, reaching for my hand across the coffee table. I'll do better, Mom, I promise. We can spend more time together. I'll bring you on vacations with us. You can move into our guest house. Anything you want. I gently withdrew my hand from his grasp. What I want can't be bought, Jason. What I want is a son who sees me, who values me not for what I can give him, but for who I am. I do see you, he insisted, tears welling in his eyes again. I've always seen you. Then why, I asked softly, did you let Lydia talk about taking me out of the picture once you had control of the company? Why did you plan to use Mother's Day to get me to sign away my shares under the guise of making me feel special? The color drained from his face. You heard that. I hear more than you think, I said. I've always heard everything, even the things you didn't say. He slumped back against the couch, the fight draining out of him. You've destroyed my legacy, he whispered, staring at the ceiling. It was then, at that precise moment, that I finally looked him directly in the eyes for the first time since he'd arrived. I only returned the silence you gave me for years. The words hung in the air between us, simple but devastating in their truth. I watched as they landed, as understanding finally dawned in his eyes. Too late, much too late. He cried then, not the manipulative tears of before, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from someplace long buried. I didn't move to comfort him. Some lessons must be learned alone. When he finally quieted, he looked up at me with swollen eyes. What happens now? Now, I said, rising from my chair. You leave. You go home to your wife. You prepare for tomorrow's announcement. You face the consequences of your choices, just as I've faced mine. Will I see you again? He asked, his voice small, like the child he once was. I walked to the front door and opened it, the evening air cool against my skin. That depends on whether you learn from this, Jason, on whether you become the man I always believed you could be. He stood slowly, moving towards the door with the heaviness of someone carrying an impossible weight. As he passed me, he paused, as if waiting for an embrace, a final word of comfort, any sign that all was not lost. But there was no hug, no reassurance, just the sound of the door closing behind him as I stepped back into my home, alone, but finally free. In the silence that followed, I picked up the plastic cup he had left behind, studying its garish pink glitter in the fading light. Then I walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in, listening to the hollow sound it made as it hit the bottom. Some gifts aren't worth keeping, and some silences say everything that words cannot. Today, I live in a smaller house, in a quiet village in New Hampshire. I plant flowers, write letters I never send. I never wanted wealth. I just wanted love, respect, a genuine look. The company was restructured. Jason never called again. But I heard his wife left him, that he sold his car, and that today he gives lectures on ethics and values. Maybe he learned, or maybe he's just trying to erase what he lived through. I love him. I still love him. But loving myself was important too. In my will, I left everything to a nursing home I visited for years. Forgotten people like me, people who never got rings or cruises, but who have beautiful stories to tell. If Jason ever hears my voice in this recording, I hope he understands. When you treat your mother like nothing, sometimes she discovers she can be everything. The autumn leaves in New Hampshire paint the landscape in fiery oranges and deep crimsons. So different from the city skyline I once knew. My cottage sits at the edge of a small lake, its weathered clapboard exterior blending into the natural beauty surrounding it. This morning, like every morning for the past 2 years, I woke with the sun, made a pot of coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, and sat on the porch swing to watch the mist rise off the water. It's a simple life, a quiet life, the kind of life where you measure your days by small pleasures rather than grand achievements. The perfection of a dahlia bloom in my garden, the call of loons across the lake at dusk, the satisfaction of finishing another chapter in the memoir I've been writing, words that may never be read by anyone but me, but which have helped me make sense of the journey that brought me here. After the company sale was finalized, I didn't want the money, not all of it anyway. I kept enough to buy this cottage, to ensure I would never worry about medical bills or heating costs in my old age. The rest I placed in a foundation to support elderly women facing financial hardship. Women like I would have been if I hadn't discovered that document in the safe. Teresa Chen kept her word. The sale was completed with my name nowhere to be found in the public records. Meridian Technologies merged with Sentinel Security Systems, creating one of the most respected financial security firms in the country. I read about it in the Wall Street Journal, like any other distant observer might. The article mentioned that Jason Parker would be stepping down as CEO, but would remain on the board in an advisory capacity. A polite fiction, I suspected, to save face. The business world can be ruthlessly practical, but it does allow for graceful exits when necessary. I never heard directly from Jason after that day in my living room, but news filtered through to me in bits and pieces. Margaret from the bank mentioned during one of our occasional phone calls that Jason and Lydia had sold their house, the sprawling colonial with the pool and the marble countertops. A distant cousin reported seeing Jason's BMW listed for sale in the newspaper classifieds. Small ripples from the stone I had cast into the pond of our lives. Then about a year ago, I received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a brochure for a business ethics seminar, Integrity in Leadership, Building Businesses. That last, it was called, and there was Jason's face, older and somehow humbler, listed as the keynote speaker. I traced his features with my fingertip, noting the new lines around his eyes, the slight graying at his temples. Time passes for all of us, leaving its marks like rings in a tree trunk, each one a story, a season of growth or hardship. I keep the brochure in my bedside drawer, not as a trophy, not as proof that I was right, but as a sign that perhaps, in losing everything, my son found something more valuable. I still love him. How could I not? Love doesn't vanish like morning mist when the sun grows hot. It changes form, perhaps, becomes more complicated, layered with disappointment and regret. But underneath, it remains. A mother's love is stubborn that way. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I volunteer at Lakeview Retirement Home, just a short drive from my cottage. I read to residents who can no longer see well enough to read for themselves. I sit with those who have no visitors, listening to their stories, holding their papery hands in mine. They've become my family of sorts, these forgotten souls whose children are too busy, too distant, or simply too indifferent to visit regularly. There's Margaret, who taught mathematics at Harvard for 40 years, but whose daughter hasn't visited since Christmas. There's William, who designed bridges that still stand across New England, now confined to a wheelchair with no one to push him through the gardens he loves. There's Eleanor, who raised 5 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam, now alone with her memories and her arthritis. We recognize each other, these forgotten elders and I. We see the worth beneath the wrinkles, the wisdom behind the cloudy eyes. We understand what it means to have given everything and to wonder if it was worth the cost. Last month, I revised my will. Everything I have, the cottage, my small savings, the few pieces of jewelry that belong to my mother, will go to Lakeview when I'm gone. Not because I have no one else to leave it to, but because I found more family within those walls than in the world outside them. Sometimes, as I sit by the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in gold and purple, I wonder if Jason ever thinks of me, if he remembers the woman who taught him to ride a bike, who stayed up all night making his Halloween costumes by hand, who believed in him when no one else would. I wonder if he understands now what I couldn't make him see then, that success without compassion is hollow, that wealth without gratitude is poverty, that a family built on conditional love is no family at all. I don't harbor bitterness anymore. That's the gift of time and distance. It softens the sharp edges of hurt, smooths the rough surfaces of anger, until all that remains is a kind of peaceful acceptance. What happened between us shaped us both, for better or worse. We carry those scars, those lessons learned too late. This recording, this story I'm telling now, wasn't my idea. One of the nurses at Lakeview suggested it as therapy, a way to process the past by speaking it aloud. Your story might help someone else, she said. Someone who feels forgotten or taken for granted. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps somewhere, someone will hear these words and recognize themselves, either as the forgotten mother or as the child who did the forgetting. And maybe, just maybe, they'll find their way back to each other before it's too late. If Jason ever hears my voice in this recording, I hope he doesn't hear accusation or judgment. I hope instead he understands the simple truth I learned too late myself. When you treat your mother like nothing, sometimes she discovers she can be everything. Everything she was always meant to be. Everything she put aside to raise you. Everything she sacrificed in the name of your success. The lake is darkening now, the last light fading from the sky. Another day passes, simple and peaceful in its ordinariness. Tomorrow will bring more flowers to tend, more letters to write and never send, more quiet moments of reflection. It's enough. More than enough for a woman who never wanted wealth or power or recognition. All I ever wanted was love, respect, a genuine look that said, I see you. In the end, I had to learn to give those things to myself. And in doing so, I found a kind of freedom I never knew existed. The sound of loons echoes across the water. Their mournful call a reminder that beauty and sadness often exist side by side, like a mother's love, boundless and broken all at once. Sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the deepest truths about our relationships. A plastic cup versus a diamond ring. A forgotten birthday versus a lavish celebration. These aren't just oversights. They're reflections of how much someone truly values your presence in their life. What would you have done in Helen's position? Would you have continued to accept being invisible? Or would you have found the courage to stand up for yourself? Sometimes the most profound act of love isn't endless sacrifice. It's teaching those we love that our worth is not negotiable, that even a mother's unconditional love requires basic respect in return. Helen didn't seek revenge. She sought justice and self-respect after years of being taken for granted. And perhaps in losing everything, her son finally found the values that truly matter. If this story touched your heart, or made you think about the relationships in your own life, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of life's most important lessons. Remember, it's never too late to acknowledge those who sacrificed everything for you. But sometimes it's too late to regret not having done so sooner.